everybody. Happy Friday, February 23rd. Shannon Adcock here, founder and president of Awake Illinois. We are on our third episode today of our live stream series, Protect the Kids, which has come about in the wake of the filing of House Bill 4876 by Rep. Ann Stava Murray. Huge, giant pushback against this in Illinois. And the great news is people are having really, really good conversations with other parents, with their policymakers, faith leaders, and most importantly, with their children. So I want to just show really quickly that we have had two live streams on this subject. Earlier this week, we kicked it off with Jeff Cleghorn, a gay rights activist who is against trans activism preying on children. Excellent conversation with him. And then yesterday we had, 2 days ago, we had episode 2 with Jeanette Cooper, an Illinois mom who is co-founder of Partners for Ethical Care. Really good conversations. Please tune into them. And the links to the slides that we're going to have today and these recorded live streams are available at our website, awakeil.com. So I am so honored and privileged to have met January Littlejohn. She's a mom in Florida. And she is a fierce advocate right now, a national voice for children. And so I'm so excited to welcome her to today's live stream of Protect the Kids. So I'm going to take us off of this screen and welcome January. Hello, January.
Good morning, Shannon. Thank you so much for having me on today.
My pleasure. So why don't we just allow people to hear a little bit about your story, about how you have become this amazing trailblazing national advocate. And it really starts with your family's story with your daughter in Florida and how it's resulted in this federal lawsuit. So please just tell us about you and what's brought you to this moment.
Absolutely. So I am just a regular mom like yourself who found ourselves in a really troubling situation at the height of COVID. So our 13-year-old daughter in spring of 2020 came to us and told us she no longer felt like a girl. And this was shortly after 3 of her friends at her local middle school had also started identifying as transgender. And for your audience, most of you know, but many of you may not, transgender today has no coherent meaning. And it's an umbrella term that encompasses about 72 different gender identities now that kids can choose from. So at the time, I'm a licensed mental health counselor, but when I was trained back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I was practicing, this issue was non-existent. And my population specialty was young adolescents and college-age individuals. And I never encountered one client that was struggling with any kind of sexual identity confusion. And further, I trained at Florida State University, that is a very liberal university, and we were not trained in this issue at all. The words non-binary, gender fluid, these words were non-existent at the time, because I can assure you, if they were, we would have been trained in these different various quote unquote gender identities, and it just wasn't happening.
Interesting.
And I give you that as a background because we hear, so many parents that come out and even professionals that come out against this ideology are gaslit. And it's really important for your audience to know that a professional like myself could have gone their entire career and never encountered this issue. And so it was really, really rare. And so I was troubled, just not as a mother, but as a clinician, seeing multiple children, let alone one, rejecting their sexual identity and claiming a trans identity. So you have to think back to the height of COVID. This was already a very anxiety-provoking time. The schools were shut down. Our kids were placed in a horrible situation, and so were the teachers, frankly. No one was really equipped for what was happening. And so our daughter, like many adolescents, was struggling with anxiety, low mood. Everything was shut down here in Tallahassee, Florida at the time. Schools were shut down. And as she was telling us this, we were completely blindsided. My daughter exhibited no confusion about her sex leading up to this announcement. And like so many other of these kids, many of them start to identify as some sort of sexual orientation, and then that morphs into the gender ideology. So what I mean by that is there were children in my daughter's friend group that were 11 and 12 years old claiming pansexual, bisexual identities, and they had zero experience with boyfriend, girlfriend, anything like that. Not that we want that to be happening at age 11. But the point is they're claiming these identities that they can't possibly fully understand because they don't have the maturity and they don't have any experience.
Mm-hmm.
Right away, I was seeing red flags, but my daughter has diagnosed ADHD, but she's also gifted. And so she's very quirky. Finding and maintaining friendships was a challenge for her. She wasn't into the normal kind of mainstream activities or books. She's very artistic. She's very gifted, actually, artistically. She's self-taught guitar. She plays all sorts of instruments. And so she's this incredible young woman. And her dad and I just really allowed her to explore this kind of artistic side of herself, let her express herself in the ways that she wanted. But we were completely blindsided by this issue. And a lot of parents were and are. The dramatic rise in especially young teen girls suddenly identifying as transgender is astronomical. And it's really scared because if this were just like a normal identity crisis that all adolescents experience throughout their, upbringing, without the medicalization piece, I would not be speaking out about this because having an identity crisis in adolescence is nothing new. Parents need to expect this. We know that our kids kind of go off the rails, and we have to provide healthy boundaries during that time so that they can, there's that push and pull during adolescent parenting, and that is normal and healthy. But what's unhealthy is these girls being taught that they can be born in the wrong body based on their normal adolescent discomfort in puberty. So, our story is really a long one, but I'll try to condense it because this developed over a little bit over a year from 2020 to 2021. But as we went into the summer of COVID, things started to escalate. Our daughter's mental health was deteriorating. She was escalating in things that she was asking for in terms of this new trans identification. So oftentimes they are asking to be called a different name, different pronouns. They're rejecting their clothes that they had been perfectly comfortable wearing, leading up to this. And our daughter was already pretty gender neutral in her clothing attire. A lot of, shirts that explored her personality, like dragons and wolves. And, she's very kind of whimsical and very big imagination. NASA, she's very STEM oriented. And so we were just really, really struggling to understand what we needed to do as parents to come alongside of her on this. And it was really scaring us because she started asking for things that, frankly, I had never heard of, like a breast binder, which is a compression garment to flatten breast. And at 13, like, she was already not very developed. And so I just started to see where she was really starting to hate parts of her body, very similar to someone struggling with an eating disorder. There's a lot of parallels between sexual confusion and gender dysphoria and eating disorders. And so I was scared for my daughter, like many parents are in this situation. And so we did find a counselor that was willing to not focus on the gender issue, but focus on the co-occurring issues. Because, we were lucky in that a lot of parents, they think that going to a counselor is the right thing to do to get help for their child. And then it turns out the counselor has been trained to only affirm these trans identities, sometimes behind the backs of parents. And so you think your child is going to get help for their anxiety and their depression and their other co-occurring psychiatric issues. And it actually ends up further harming the child, because what happens is there's a diagnostic overshadowing that occurs where all of the psychiatric issues are put aside, including things that are very serious like sexual trauma, previous self-harm. Up
Right.
to 40% of these girls are on the autism spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we move through the summer and we were coming into fall, we were lucky enough in Florida to be able to go back to school in person. I know that a lot of parents did not even have that opportunity in the fall of 2020. But
Not in Illinois.
right. And so our pattern of thinking was, okay, maybe this will bring back a sense of normalcy. She'll go back
Sure.
to school
Right.
and we can continue to work through this with a therapist. So I decided to reach out to the school. I was volunteer of the year at the school. I was very, very involved in my children's schooling. I ran the copy room at this middle school. So I had, in the as I was called the copy mom. So in the copy room, teachers are always coming in and out, putting their copy request in. And so I really felt like I had a good handle on teachers at the school. I had run their Veterans Day program. So up until this issue, I had no reason not to trust the school.
Sure.
And I really did see the school as a partner, and never in a million years did I think that they would violate my trust or my parental authority in the way that they did. And so I reached out to a teacher and I let her know what was going on. Because of my daughter's ADHD, she has a 504 plan. So part of that was telling the teacher about, her ADHD, but it was also giving her a heads up that, hey, this is something we're struggling with as a family. We've reached out to a mental health professional that my daughter has just started seeing. We are not affirming at home. And that I thought this new identity was a direct result of her in-person friend group that was also trans-identifying. And because of the lawsuit, there are aspects of that communication that I can't go into.
Sure.
But I genuinely thought this was going to be treated like a nickname. And honestly, I didn't recognize my own parental authority at the time that I do now. There wasn't really a need for me to be alarmed yet. And so a couple of weeks after my daughter got into the car, she said, Mom, I had a meeting at school today and they asked me which restroom I wanted to go to. And so this was a meeting about her name. And right away, my alarm bells were going off because number one, meeting, that sounds very official. Why was I not told about this? Because anytime they've, even with the 504 plan, you have to have a parent signature. You have to have an in-person meeting with that parent in order to execute a 504 plan. So I was confused not only how they had had a meeting with my child that I was unaware of, but I was also very confused about why they would ask her which restroom she wanted to use. What does that even mean? Because at the time, she was identifying as non-binary. So I'm thinking, this is ridiculous. They know she's female. I know of no non-binary bathrooms at the school. Non-binary, we didn't tell our daughter this because we were trying to come alongside her, but non-binary is made up. It's nonsensical.
Yes.
There's no person that's born without male or female. That's just not possible. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like we're all either in a category as male or female, sex is binary. And so I immediately emailed the guidance counselor and I said, I would like to know about this meeting you had with my child. She said that there was a meeting where you asked her which restroom she wanted to use. And I think this is a safety issue. I would like to know right now what happened. And again, the reason why I was not up in the office is parents were not allowed on campus at the time. The doors were locked and you were not allowed into the building without express permission in the form of a meeting, a scheduled meeting. It was very, very strict. And so it was less than an hour that I was called back with the assistant principal and the guidance counselor. And so right away, I knew something was very wrong. And they told me, Mrs. Littlejohn, we cannot give you any information about your child or the meeting we had. Your child is now protected by a non-discrimination law. And I was floored. I
Sure.
was having a
Of
hard
course.
time processing what they were saying. Like, we were already really troubled and scared about what
Sure.
was happening with our daughter. But now to learn that the school has had a meeting and they're not telling me what even happened with my child. So my only recourse was to go to the assistant superintendent of the school district, which we did. And
Mm.
just to give you an idea of how long this took, this went back and forth, the communication, for about 7 weeks. And we were finally
Wow.
given an in-person meeting with the principal of the middle school. And all along, my husband and I had continued to ask for legal justification for them
Mhm.
meeting with our 13-year-old daughter without our knowledge or consent. So at this meeting is when we were shown for the first time the transgender gender nonconforming support plan that they had completed with our child. And I was shocked. I was angry. This was a 6-page document, and it wasn't just about her name or pronouns. This was a 6-page plan where they asked her questions that would have absolutely impacted her safety, such as
Mm.
which restroom she prefers to use, which sex she prefers to room with on overnight field trips. And then they asked her, how should we refer to you when speaking to your parents? Should we use your birth name and pronouns or your preferred name and pronouns? And this is to effectively deceive parents
Yes.
that these social transitions have ever occurred.
Yes.
And, following this meeting, I did a deep dive into this issue, and I learned that this was standard protocol, not just at our school, but it's in schools all over Florida and frankly, all over the nation. This gender support plan was from
Mhm.
an organization called Gender Spectrum. And these pseudo policies, they did not call them policies, they called them guides. And that was on purpose because when you
Mhm.
have something called an actual policy, it has to go through school board approval. But
Right.
if it's a guide, they can train everybody from the cafeteria worker to the bus driver to the teachers to the guidance counselors
Mm.
without
Mm.
notifying parents. And so,
Awful.
starting around 2016, an activist organization called Equality Florida
Mm.
had infiltrated public
Of course.
schools in our state under the guise of anti bullying and non discrimination.
Right.
And so we found out that this was basically the MO of these activist organizations all over our country. It goes all the way
Yep.
up to Human Rights Campaign,
Yep.
Listen, GLAAD,
Trevor Project.
Trevor Project. It's all a part of this attempt to drive a wedge between a child and their family.
Mhm.
And so this social transition of our child created a huge wedge between our daughter and us
Mm.
because it not only put the burden of whether or not our parental authority would be honored on the child. Because think about this power differential, Shannon. You have a 13-year-old child who is emotionally 11 because of her ADHD in a
Mhm.
closed door room with 3 adults. There was the guidance counselor, the assistant principal, and a social worker I had never met. Filling out this plan with my child.
Awful.
No one there to advocate for her, to keep her
Mm.
safe. And
Right.
her answers were so childlike because of the ongoing litigation. I can't show them to you, but I wish I could. Because
Mm.
to ask a 13-year-old girl if she's comfortable rooming with males, it's unconscionable. And
It
now we
is.
know
It's
that
disgusting.
this is actually happening. There was a
Mhm.
couple in Colorado, and thank the Lord that little girl's mom happened to be on the field trip. But she
Right.
found herself in this situation where she was being forced to share a bed with a male child.
Right. Just
And
disgusting.
it is, and it's a safety issue. And it is gaslighting the worst kind to make these children think that not number one, that this is okay, that it's safe to allow males into girls' spaces,
Mm-hmm.
but it's making them, it's destabilizing their identities to teach them that
Yeah.
they could possibly be born in the wrong body.
Yes.
But it's also making it easier to groom these children, because once you convince a child, an impressionable child, that it's okay to keep secrets from their parents, you are opening the door for all types of grooming behavior to happen to that child. And we have
Yes.
seen this happen as well with Sage's case in Virginia,
Yeah.
where these children are now living a double life. And the
Mm-hmm.
only people that are not aware of the child's struggle with their sexual identity are their parents or grandparents, who know and love them the most.
Yes.
And living that double life causes a great amount of distress. You
Mm-hmm.
are colluding with a child to lie to their parents. And it is not the school's responsibility to evaluate my child for a mental health issue, or to be implementing a mental health treatment, a
Right.
psychosocial medical intervention like social transitioning. That they are grossly unqualified to be taking those steps,
Right.
but especially without parental input and consent. Because,
Exactly.
as I stated, a vast majority of these kids have co-occurring psychiatric issues that will go, you know, be brushed under the rug, untreated, when parents are excluded
Mm-hmm.
from these social transitions.
Absolutely. And so your story is so important because I think too often the false depictions in the media and on social media, it's just making it seem like this is all hyperbole. And so it's really easy, I think, even from a strong parent to, out of human preservation, just say, that's not happening. It's not happening in my school. It's not going to happen to my kid. But you are doing a phenomenal job, January, of putting you and your family out there to say, this can happen. This is how it happens. And this is why you have to, as you say, quote, inoculate your children from this predation. And I don't care how noble some counselor or staffer at a school thinks this is, by somehow assuming that every parent is going to reject their child for dealing with any manner of mental health issues. But that is wrong. And you are disrupting this, and you're empowering other parents to know that there are options for their children, and to defend their children, and to defend their parental rights. And so thank you for what you're doing and telling your story. And we're going to delve more into this. You've given some background, but we're really going to delve more into, you're just doing a beautiful job. I'm so grateful for you, January. You're speaking all across the country. You're with an organization we're going to talk about in a bit. Do No Harm is a parent advocate there. Um, and you asked, should we talk about what's happening in Illinois? Right. So, what are we seeing in terms of this infusion of gender ideology and of these discussions with children? And you talk about how it's destabilizing kids to be gender confused, which, let's stop talking about gender. You're born a boy, you're born a girl. We talked, over the phone about this. So in Illinois, we've done a very large campaign for 2 years now against the national sex education standards. And so we have at awakeil.com/opt-out all of the information about this. Again, this is not hyperbole. These standards are written into Illinois statute, where if a school district adopts comprehensive sexual education, they have to use what's called the National Sex Education Standards, K through 12. So this issue could be happening as young as a 5-year-old in kindergarten. And the lessons are there. All of these slides will be available for people to click through. I think all of our members know about this, but if you're new to this conversation, I'll encourage you to go to this website. But why don't you talk to us, especially given your background as a mental health counselor? What is the impact this is going to be having on children as young as 5 who are told that they're born into the wrong body? What is that going to look like for their growing minds and their growing bodies?
Well, it's creating a level of chaos that we have never seen. And they're essentially, Walt Heyer talks a lot about this. They are manufacturing, quote unquote, trans identified children, because these are children, had they not been introduced to this ideology, they would not be experiencing any kind of confusion. And we really need to think about what is gender ideology. And so gender ideology teaches a child, as you stated, as young as 5, that we all have a gender identity. And this gender identity is completely separate from our sex. It's an internal feeling that they choose. And, there's even so many examples of books that are meant for toddlers and 5-year-olds. And one of them is Bye Bye Binary. And so in Bye Bye Binary, it tells the lie that when you are born, doctors make a guess as to whether you're a boy or a girl. And sometimes they guess wrong. That is completely, first of all, a lie.
Yes, it's a lie.
We know what sex a baby is even before birth because we can observe it. So, whether or not you're coming at this from a faith standpoint or an evolutionary standpoint, the truth is the truth no matter what. Sex is binary. And so to be pushing these lies onto children as young as 5, who, by the way, anyone who knows about brain development knows these are very impressionable children. It is not hard to make a child believe a lie. Look at the Tooth Fairy. Look at Santa Claus. I mean, these are examples of children look to the adults in their life to help them make sense of the world, and they trust those adults to tell them the truth. Yes. And so when you're teaching a child that you choose your gender, that you can choose to be a boy, a girl, neither or both, that it's a spectrum. And you have to understand, even asking a child for their pronouns or showing them a book on different pronouns, that is injecting gender ideology into their brains.
It is. And it's happening in Illinois, January. People don't want to admit this, but we've been sounding the alarm. If your school district has opted to teach comprehensive sexual education, they will adopt the National Sex Education Standards K through 12. So My Princess Boy is one of the suggested books, which is very confusing about gender. And that's meant for grades K through 2. All of the modules for these lessons are available at our website, and I encourage people to look at them. And so, when you look at, we have at this link, people can go to see if their school was registered at the Illinois State Board of Education as teaching these radical lessons. Chicago Public Schools, one of the largest districts in the country, more than 245,000 students have been exposed to these radical lessons, K through 12. Elgin, U46, thousands of students, Oswego, Peoria, Evanston. Parents need to know. And so we had talked about this, Parents Defend an Education. And again, all of these links are at the slideshow that will be shown at our blog. They were able to investigate this. And through a Freedom of Information Act public records request out of Waterloo Community District Unit 5, they were providing training on transgender issues that included the gender unicorn. So, and then the superintendent labeled student protests of this transgender policy as harassment. And an English teacher said that parents should not be involved with gender identity of students. So basically endorsing the chaos and the trauma that your family experienced, resulting in this lawsuit. This district is all in on waging war on the family. And this genderbread person, why don't you talk to us about this? Because people, again, think that this is a joke. They don't believe it's real, but it is 100% introduced to young, impressionable children as young as kindergarten, maybe even earlier in some of these state preschool programs, if they're all in on social emotional learning and sexuality and gender. Let's talk about this gender unicorn.
So there's multiple variations of this. You just had showed the genderbread man. This is the gender unicorn. There's a gender snowman, but it doesn't matter what kind of cute cartoon character you use. It's all a lie. We don't have a gender identity. And if you look at this, they break this down. It's confusing even to adults, and that's by design.
Mm-hmm.
And most adults are going to look at this and say, oh my gosh, that's so ridiculous. They shake their head and they move on with their day. But what they're misunderstanding and they don't fully realize is kids don't shake their head and move on with their day. They
Right.
take that as factual because the authoritative adults in their life are telling them it's true. And then they're being told it is not kind if you don't believe this, if you don't affirm your friends who want to be a different gender. And so it's
Right.
a massive amount of brainwashing happening. And, even asking a child what their pronouns are is not a neutral act because it's giving them this idea that my outsides may not match my insides. And in some situations, it's being painted as this normal part of like child development. Oh, you just explore your gender. There is nothing normal about this because when you confuse a child about their sex, the pathway that leads them down is body modification procedures that
Right. It's
they
a
are
pipeline.
100% doing on children. So this
Yep.
isn't just about self-expression and a girl dressing in a more masculine way or a boy liking, princess dolls. This is about placing a child on puberty blockers, moving them on to cross-sex hormones, and then performing double mastectomies on girls as young as 12 and 13 years old. This is a medical scandal of gigantic
Yes.
proportions that we have never seen being performed in real time on vulnerable children. And you don't need a medical degree to know that it is a bad idea to cut the healthy breast off of 12-year-old girls, that they
Right.
may one day regret that. Because at the end of the day, kids cannot fundamentally consent to these irreversible changes that are being made to them. And,
Correct.
the activists will say, well, wait a second, the kids aren't consenting, their parents are. But let's back up. This is all based on self ID. There's no
Mhm.
test to determine if a child is born in the wrong body because there can't be. There is
Right.
no scientific, backing of this notion that a boy can be born with a girl brain or a girl can be born with a boy brain. That is nonsense pseudoscience that infiltrated our psychological and medical communities. And
Yes.
so, what parents also have to realize, the reason I talk so much about inoculating children from this ideology is because it's everywhere. It has infiltrated every aspect of our culture. It's on
Mhm.
steroids in the month of June, Pride Month. You can't take your gender confused child into Target, into the bookstore, into Walgreens, literally every corner. That child is
Mhm.
then being affirmed in their trans identity. It's
Right.
in our
It's not just
programming.
being normalized, it's being celebrated. It's being
That's
paraded
correct.
and celebrated. And so, a child finds themselves to be in this unusually protected class where they call, you're love bombed, right? If this is happening in your peer group, if it's happening in your school, you are love bombed. You are just like, you're almost as like exciting as a unicorn walking down the hallway. And so, of course, if you're getting those dopamine hits, in a time when you're craving them and you're very vulnerable and you're insecure, yeah, it's gone off the rails in our culture. It's gone off the rails in social media. And I just want to come back, January. So this was out of Waterloo Trans Student Educational Services 2014, but this came out of Prevent School Violence Illinois. These non-government organizations and these community organizations, they are totally embedded, and a lot of them are getting funding even from the states, from grants. They are seen as these noble figures. Do you think Awake Illinois will be able to get any of these flyers of our own making into the school? Highly unlikely. Moms for Liberty, highly unlikely. So there's such a one-sided conversation happening with these topics in the school and all of these visuals. Just to go back really quickly, so they had all of this with the gender unicorn. I have the genderbread person up there. It's all the same concept, like you said, these cutesy
Mhm.
little graphics that are just nonsense. And they also are now, Waterloo, allowing the opposite biological sex into the bathrooms. So that's already a policy that they're putting into school policies across the state of Illinois within the human rights, under the human rights banner. And so they have their policy here. To the extent we determine that the nurse's office bathroom line was a form of harassment, students will be disciplined for their participation in the harassment. So y'all better go along to get along is basically what they're saying. They're threatening kids who want biologically protected spaces, private spaces. They don't want to hear any pushback. So that's what's happening in Waterloo. The gender unicorn, the genderbread person, it's all the same chaos. And to your point, it's going to funnel children as young as 5 into this pipeline if they are not inoculated, if they are, if they are even staying in the public schools. We talk to a lot of organizations that are actually championing the full armor of children by actually just pulling them from schools that are doing this type of ideology, particularly with the young children. And we have 3 children. We have our youngest is our daughter. We have 2 boys and a girl. We pulled our daughter after first grade from the public schools because we thought this is a giant beast. And as much as we are obviously very intentional parents and talking to our kids about these issues and raising them with our value system, I was very worried, along with my husband, that she wouldn't be safe in an environment where this could happen, as it did with your daughter, to a girl as young as 6 or 7. So we didn't want to take the chance, and it's unfortunate. In Illinois, we pay some of the most burdensome property taxes into our public schools, but the safety of our child came first. So you're seeing a lot more homeschool families now, which you didn't see before. They're not an exclusive sort of off the grid small group of families. Now they're giant. It's growing. Latasha Fields is a huge homeschool proponent in the south side of Chicago, which otherwise families would be sending to Chicago public schools with these radical sex ed lessons, K through 12. So I pose this question, January, often when I speak with groups, which is what comes to a teacher's mind when they see your student's name on their roster? And you mentioned, you were a very involved parent. You weren't just a ghost figure who dropped the kid off and see you later. You were very, very involved. And it's so unfortunate that now being a volunteer isn't really enough. You have to actually express to them what you expect to happen or not to happen with your child if you're going to keep them in a traditional school model. So I ask people, do you know the teachers? Do they know you? Do they know that you have submitted opt-out forms to put on file to get your parental rights on record so that, heaven forbid, you have to file a lawsuit? You have tangible documentation. Do you think parents are talking to schools, even with hearing your story? Do you think they're talking enough to schools about what their expectations are with their child?
No, and I think we have a parenting crisis in our country. We have outsourced so much of our parenting to the school, and many of us were asleep at the wheel prior to 2020. And
Very
so
true.
even though I was in the schools, I had blind trust that my values would be respected. I didn't question, I didn't ask questions. And unfortunately, this is not just being pushed from the state level. This is being pushed from our federal government. You have the CDC giving grants to schools for LGBTQ curriculum. So this is systemic. This is in our doctor's offices. You have to question not only the teachers and the admin about this issue and what's being taught. You have to be vigilant in the pediatrician's office. Because in places like Cincinnati Children's Hospital, Rhode Island, of course, out west, and really anywhere.
Lurie Children's Hospital here in Illinois.
Oh, yeah, they're horrible. But you have doctors being trained to ask young children in the pediatrician's office, do you consider yourself a girl, a boy, or somewhere in between? That is unacceptable. That question, first of all, should not be asked to children, period, full stop. But if we can't trust our doctors to understand science and what science says about sex, what are we doing? And so I think a lot of parents are feeling really betrayed by the medical and psychological fields. They're feeling like they can no longer trust the teachers. And don't get me wrong, there are some fabulous, amazing teachers. I had a lot of people thank me after we went public with our story and filed a federal lawsuit because, going back to what you said about the celebration, our daughter was celebrated. She was never celebrated and cheered along for being a girl, which is what she is.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
was, part of what was really, really traumatic for me as a parent was knowing the amount of self-hate my daughter had.
Mm.
And knowing that this new identity was a symptom of that self-hate, and her attempting to leave that person behind and create someone new. And so to see not just people in the culture
Mhm.
celebrate and affirm her, but to see friends and teachers celebrate and affirm my daughter's path along this path of self-harm, it felt dystopian in a way. It felt like
Sure.
her dad and I were the only ones trying to protect her
Right.
from this impending medical harm that we felt like she was on the pathway forward, because she was asking about puberty blockers and telling us that she had planned to get, they call
Wow.
it top surgery. It's all these euphemisms. But what we came to understand, and I think where parents need to go with this, they don't understand what they're saying. There's no depth to their belief system. They are parroting what they've been told to believe.
Mhm.
And so parents need to not operate from a place of fear, but they
Right.
need to engage the school. They need to be asking those questions. And if their parental authority is not going to be honored, get your child out of that school. I don't care
Yeah.
if it's public or private, because you also
Sure.
have private schools being influenced through the
Sure.
NEIAS. So you cannot trust that just because it's a private school that they're not injecting this ideology as well.
Right.
So it is critical that parents not only be engaged on this issue, but come to
Right.
the understanding, if your child does fall prey to this, ideology like mine did, they are confused. They
Right.
do not know what they are saying. We should not be taking what they are saying at face value. And
Right.
we
And
wouldn't do
that's why
it with
this
anything
bill
else.
Right. That's why this bill is so radical that even if it's, say,
Mm.
for example, John Anthony on AM 560 suggested when I talked to him and went on this program that this Rep Stava Murray put this forth in the Rules Committee just as a publicity stunt to get her name in the media. Maybe that's true. She's notorious for filing really radical bills. And it's an election year. And so whether or not this is a political stunt doesn't matter to me. This is an opportunity for parents to realize that this agenda is very much happening. And she is putting in this bill that a parent like you that is intentional and looking to stand in the gap between this harmful, wicked ideology and your child, she wants to call parents who would do that an abuser of children. But the real abuse, to your point, January, is gender ideology. The real abuse is putting children, growing children, on puberty blockers. The real abuse is taking a scalpel and saying that the best thing a confused child can do is mutilate and sterilize themselves. We are going to stop this. Billboard Chris says it all the time, and he's right. Tavistock closed in Europe. We saw that as the crystal ball, and we're just a little bit delayed in the wave of it being in the United States. But so many people like yourself are just sounding this alarm for parents to wake up. Whatever you need to do to protect your child. And we're telling Ann Stava Murray in real time, hell no to this bill or to any agenda or any policy or guide. I don't care what guidelines schools try and put into this. We're saying no, do not mess with our babies. And so if we go through, there are some resources that people are able to utilize from organizations that you're affiliated with. And those are the opt-out forms. People know about that. But let's talk a little bit about Do No Harm and how this organization came about, the great work that you're doing, that clinicians are doing, excuse me, and detransitioners, those who have been harmed by this wicked ideology and are speaking truth to it and trying to stop others from being harmed. Tell us about this organization you're working with.
Absolutely. And so, before I get into Do No Harm, I want parents to think about this question.
Mm-hmm.
Would you allow a teacher or a pediatrician to offer your child drugs? I mean, that would be insane, right? You would say absolutely not, because drugs are bad for your children and they poison the body. Well,
Sure.
gender ideology poisons their mind. And
It's a
so
great analogy.
we have got to start thinking about this ideology as the threat that it truly is. It
Yes.
poisons these children's minds. It turns them against their own bodies, and then it turns them against their families if they don't immediately affirm this false identity. But I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to talk about Do No Harm, because it's a fairly new organization that started in 2022 by Dr. Stanley Goldfarb, and it really was about getting identity politics out of medicine. We shouldn't be treating patients based on their race. Like, oh my goodness, like that's a novel concept. No, that's actually a racist concept when you're treating a patient based on their race. And so Dr. Goldfarb was very alarmed, with a lot of what he was seeing in terms of identity politics infiltrating medicine and how medicine was being performed.
Yes.
And people continue to ask him, well, what are you going to do about transgender ideology and what's happening to kids? Because, for a really long time, especially around 2018, there were really brave parents that were sounding the alarm. I can't tell you how isolating and lonely that must have been for those parents, because they intuitively knew something was wrong. And this was before Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage, was released in the summer of 2020. This was before GenSpec, before Do No Harm. And those parents were horribly gaslit, called awful names, simply for shedding a light on what was happening.
Right.
Because until Billboard Chris started really showing those horrific Boston Children's Hospital videos where, they've got cheery doctors saying, yes, we'll do a gender affirming hysterectomy on your child.
Right.
People didn't believe it was happening. And the doctors denied it, even though we knew they were cutting the healthy breast off these children. They were lying and denying it. So we've come a long way since 2018. But Dr. Goldfarb thankfully realized, because any doctor or researcher that actually critically looks at this issue and looks at the literature being used to justify these medical interventions, especially on children, they are horrified. Because the evidence, not only is it, there's very few studies to begin with, we just don't have a lot of information. But the information we do have, the literature we do have, is very low quality. And so he started looking at, okay, well, what are other more socially liberal countries doing? Well, the UK did a systematic review following Kira Bell, a very brave detransitioner who filed a lawsuit against the Tavistock Clinic. She had her breasts removed as a teenager. And they did a systematic review of the evidence. Then other countries that are more socially liberal, like Finland and Sweden, started also doing systematic reviews of the evidence. And that's really the gold star when it comes to research, to determine, are we putting forth the best evidence-based treatment for a so-called problem?
Right.
But one of the issues with this entire situation is the activists have done a really good job at trying to normalize this. This is an issue of the mind, not of the body.
Right.
And they can somehow convinced through WPATH guidelines that are extremely low quality and flimsy on their own, that we should be treating the body in an attempt to fix the issue in the mind.
Right. And there are whistleblowers now, clinicians now, January, like Dr. Haim out of Texas, right? He is a brave clinician who was a part of this.
A surgeon. He's a surgeon.
Yes, a surgeon. And he is saying exactly what you said. He has come out and as a whistleblower has said that you can't treat a psychiatric problem and mental health issues with physical body mutilation. And he uses the example of lobotomies of earlier 20th century, which were barbaric. Those were stopped. And unfortunately, too many patients, were harmed or killed by that. So we're seeing modern day barbaric procedures being done on children, this is the time to take a stand. And so I'm glad that Do No Harm has started as an organization. They have investigations and complaints that have been filed for civil rights complaints. And so I think that this is the way forward. It's going to take litigation, like your case for your family and organizations. So all of the links to all of these organizations and all the slides will be available, including Do No Harm Medicine .org.
Yes, and Do No Harm, I helped to create the Gender Ideology Parent Resource page. And so that's a great way for parents to get informed on this issue and inoculate your children from this issue. But also, there are resources there if your child falls prey. The other thing that Do No Harm is very active in is we have model legislation for a couple of bills. One to restrict these interventions for minors. But the other one is a new initiative that we are really hopeful that states will take on, which is the Detransitioner Bill of Rights. Because you have this group of, vulnerable individuals, some who medically transition as adults, and now realized it was all a lie. It didn't fix their root underlying psychiatric issues. And they're also left now with this irreversible, sometimes harm to their bodies at very young ages. You look at a Chloe Cole who has medical complications from her double mastectomy that was performed on her at age 15.
Yeah.
And, insurance companies and state Medicaid will pay for all of these transition procedures. And I hate even using the word transition, because one of the biggest lies being told, in addition to someone can be born in the wrong body, is that you can actually change your sex. Because the reality is, no matter what you do to your physical self, you can mimic characteristics of the opposite sex, but you can never change your sex. No. And so that's what a lot of these vulnerable individuals are realizing. And it's not a mistake that many of the detransitioners detransition around the ages of 24 to 26, because that's when the frontal lobe and the brains are fully developed. And they come to realize, with the life experience and maturity that they then have, that it was all a lie. It didn't fix anything. And then when they go to get help, which you can imagine there's a huge distrust now toward the medical and psychological field for them, there's no help for them. Insurance is not going to.
They're abandoned. They're abandoned. Medicaid pays for them to mutilate and sterilize themselves, but they are not there when they need to be rehabilitated from this trauma.
That's right. And you brought up the lawsuits. So another, read the Detransitioner Bill of Rights, but one of the initiatives in there is not just getting health coverage for these individuals, but it's also extending the time for someone to be able to sue. Because ultimately, what's going to happen with these lawsuits, and I hope every single detransitioner files one.
Yes, class action, every single one.
That's right. It's going to, the amount of insurance, like the cost of health and liability insurance, is going to increase so much that
it'll be unsustainable.
Hospital, it'll be unsustainable, and we're already seeing effects of that even without the payouts. We've got 2 lawsuits against Kaiser Permanente, one by Chloe Cole and one by Layla Jane. And Layla Jane, if I'm not mistaken, was only 12 or 13 when they cut her breast off. And
no, it's just awful.
We're just talking about horrific things that are happening
so that's great
under the guise of medicine. And you brought up Dr. Heim. One of the most profound things that he said, he has such a great way of really breaking this issue down very simply. He says the purpose of medicine is to heal or to bring someone back to a healthy state from disease. What these interventions are actually doing is putting a healthy body into a state of disease and causing harm.
Right. Yeah,
and so that's
terrible,
really important.
Evil. So these are all great resources from Do No Harm, the Bill of Rights. You have some resources, some parent resources to protect their children from gender ideology. So these are all great tools. Again, donoharmmedicine.org. I want to show here this question that that David is asking. He's asking, where are our
Mm,
churches? I have been asking where they are since 2020. Um, I thought that when I ran up on the Hill as a total accidental advocate for children and for our country, that the churches would already be on the Hill. Like, I just ran up and was like, surely, the people who love children and are living biblically, living the word, are going to be here already, and they weren't. January. I don't know how it was in your area, but the silence is still deafening. They still are not stepping up for the children of their congregation. And so I want to just transition to another resource that I think is going to be really, really important. And I want to share uh, to to basically demand that your faith leaders actually speak biblically to protecting children. And so this is this is the question that I have, or this is the answer that I have. The church and faith leaders have an opportunity to empower their congregants on all of these resources. So why don't we transition to the Child and Parental Rights Campaign, which is a separate
mm,
organization that's looking to defend these kids and to empower faith leaders to respond to this crisis. So why don't you walk
yes.
us through this?
So the Child and Parental Rights Campaign is a wonderful law firm that really have specialized in this issue of defending parental rights in this area. But the other initiative that I have helped with is I co-authored what you have on the screen, which is the
Yes,
Church Transgender Response Guide. Because
yes,
what I realized when we were walking our daughter through this confusion, and by the way, she is completely desisted in her trans identification now. And
beautiful.
in fact, like so many of these other kids that are coming out of this, it's almost like coming out of a spell because
Yes,
now she feels ashamed. Like, how could I have fallen for such a lie? Like, it is such
wow,
a lie. And but
right,
what was happening was I was educating the church on something they should have been educating me and my child on.
right.
And so it's really, really important that this guide, it's very comprehensive. It is almost a
It is.
100 pages, and it
I
really
have it
covers
right here.
it covers every facet a church will face,
Yeah,
from legal questions, church policies, because I think a lot of pastors are scared. They
they
don't know
are.
what their rights are, and they also don't know how to talk about this. But we have to be inoculating our children, and if they're not going to hear the truth at church, where are they going to hear it? This is not hard. All you have to
Right.
read is the book of Genesis to know what the Bible says on these matters. We were
Yes.
made male and female in his image, perfect in his image. And so we need to be, pastors need to be preaching this from the pulpit, especially
Yes.
youth pastors. We need to be
Yes.
explicitly telling these children, God made you perfect, male and female. If you hear anything other than what is in the word, it is a lie. And then parents need to be training their kids. This is part of the inoculation. If someone tries to talk to you about gender or pronouns, that person is no longer safe. You need to
Right.
come tell me immediately. If a
Yes.
teacher or counselor or any person tells you it's okay to keep secrets from me and your dad, you come tell me immediately. That person is no longer safe. But
Yes.
pastors, this book is really, it's not just for education, it's a call to action.
It is. It
We
is a
have
rally
got
call.
we have got to get pastors off the sidelines, unafraid
Yes.
to speak biblical truth. And unfortunately, there are churches that are captured by this ideology.
Yeah.
And, you know, what I would say to that is it is not kind to lie. And
No.
this entire ideology is built on the ultimate lie. We should not
100%.
lie to those we love. But also in the guide, it talks about how to come along parents. So this guide is not just for church pastors and admin, it's also for parents and congregation members.
Yes.
We have something here in Tallahassee called the Stephen Ministry, which I think is actually, it's national. But
Yes,
these are
it
church
is.
members that get trained to come alongside. So, I've been given it to our Stephen ministers. So that
Great.
it's not an if, it's when they encounter a parent that's struggling with this, they will know how to then come alongside these parents, because we've got to get back to a place. It's what Timothy Tennant talks about. It's position versus posture. Our
Mhm.
posture is always going to be one of love and compassion, as Jesus calls us to be. But our
Mhm.
position has to be one based in biblical truth. And I think
100%.
about a Walt Higher. This is not to judge people. It's not to turn anyone away from the church. When
Right.
Walt Higher was still living as a woman, he went to a pastor for help. And that pastor did not shame him. He did
Right.
not say, "You're living in sin." He essentially allowed the Lord and the word of the Bible to do the work, but
Yeah.
he never lied to him. He never condoned what Walt was doing, or how he was identifying. And that's really, really important, because the other aspect of this is we are about to see a wave of detransitioners
Yes.
that we have never seen
It's
before.
it's
And
going
the
to be
church,
insane
yes, and the church has got to be willing and ready to
to speak to
welcome
it.
these individuals,
Yes.
and to welcome them with open
Yes.
arms and show them the love and healing that can come of
And
knowing
shepherd
God.
them and
That's
support
right.
them. Yes, and to speak to this. And so this is a guide that I encourage everyone to bring to their pastors, to their youth pastors, to their
Mhm.
parishes, to their congregations. These are the answers that your faith leaders need to read and to be empowered to speak to. So at childparentrights.org/resources, and this postcard can be shared, snapshot it, but the links are going to be available for you to download it. And then there is also an at a glance here, so this is kind of like a Cliff Notes version, right, that
Right.
people can go through to just kind of get a glimpse into how this is going to equip the congregation, the leadership, the families, and everyone who is, we know is going. You're right, the wave is coming, and so excuse
Yeah.
me, people need to be armed with really good resources.
And Shannon,
So
in this book, just so you're
excuse
aware,
me. Mhm.
there's a huge section that I wrote for parents of how to walk your child through this. This is a question I get asked all the time. How do we rescue our children from this ideology? So there's a chapter in there. And the other really significant chapter that you could actually download on its own for very low cost is how to handle CPS. Because
Mm,
God forbid a bill like that passes in your state, CPS are going to be called on parents for not affirming and trying to protect their child from this medical abuse.
right. No,
And
well,
so
this
there's
bill can't pass. It can't pass. We have to
no,
just
it
say that
can't,
this
it
cannot
won't
pass,
pass, but you have to understand, in other
but it's
states,
coming.
this is
Yes,
already happening.
it's happened. Yes, you're right.
You've got parents losing custody of their children, especially when you've got a split between an affirming parent and a non-affirming
Yeah,
parent.
that was
You had
Jeanette's.
Jeanette,
That was
that's right,
Jeanette's
Jeanette
story
Cooper.
yesterday or 2 days ago. Yes,
So
yes,
this guide
exactly.
is not just for pastors, but it's also for parents on how to equip themselves for every aspect of this ideology as well.
Absolutely. So these resources are so important. And this is where I appeal. People feel like claustrophobic almost and suffocated by the weight of this agenda. But there are resources for you, for your family, for your community. So I
Mhm.
encourage you to be empowered with them. And these are some of the best resources across the country being utilized, probably even beyond our country, quite honestly, because there's so many talented and powerful people like you in these organizations doing really good work. So I know that good things will come, but it's going to take all of us to do something. So please use these
That's
resources and
right.
share them. And so all of this will be available in the blog. So just to come back to this bill, again, was it a political stunt? Is she incredibly misguided? Whatever's going on with her, this has been a very empowering moment for Illinois to realize that this agenda is happening, that people have been harmed, too many people, and we have to make sure it's not your child, and certainly make sure that you are never criminalized for being a good parent, that you are never criminalized for being an ethical clinician or surgeon or doctor or pastor. So we've had thousands of emails already go in to her to get on the record. I think that this was a huge miscalculation on her part. If she thought this was going to be a successful political stunt, it has been named and it has been shamed. You have people across the country, Billboard Chris, Libs of TikTok, everybody has been saying this is insane and hell no. So keep going on record. Our organization, we just want to see you be able to protect your kids, to preach the truth, and to share resources and get involved. So awakeil.com, please reach out to us. Can I just do a quick preview, January? I know you know a lot of these people. So you're rounding up this first week of the Protect the Kids live stream. I'm so glad that you could come on, share all of January's testimony and remarks. She's amazing. And then next week, we're going to have Dr. Quentin Van Meter on Monday at 4:30 Central Time, board certified pediatric endocrinologist. He actually was a principal investigator in the AbbVie study on long-acting puberty blockers. He is a national child advocate trying to sound the alarm, to let people know, let me get back to that, to let people know that this is a wicked, wicked, harmful ideology, and we're going to protect these children. So he comes from a clinical perspective, which is so important. And he's formerly head of the American College of Pediatrics, which is the total opposite of the Illinois-based American Academy of Pediatrics, which leans into all of this woke medicine and gender ideology, gender affirming nonsense. So he is a great perspective and insight from the clinical perspective. Sarah Higdon, writer for Post Millennial, absolutely sounding the alarm on how this agenda should not be coming for the children, how to stand in the gap, and comes from the perspective of being a transsexual. Same for Christine Rebstock out of Connecticut, disgusted by what is happening with children, standing in the gap right now. It's amazing, and then Nicholas Blooms, a gay detransitioner out of Illinois, January, in his early 20s. He actually walked into a Planned Parenthood clinic, not far from where I live, 30-minute appointment, and they gave him estradiol and hormones. 30 minutes.
It's the Wild West of gender medicine. There is no safeguarding, especially for adults.
And yes. And so all of these perspectives are so important. It is so many different backgrounds and personalities and beautiful people coming together to protect children. And so you cannot call us homophobic. You cannot call us transphobic. You cannot call us child abusers. You cannot call us any of those things. I mean, if you do, that's fine, but it's not going to stop us. This effort to protect children cannot be canceled. And so tune into next week's live streams, watch the ones from this week and share them. And January, I am so grateful that you have sounded this alarm for the entire country. What final remarks do you have to empower people and to get them to wake up and be confident and courageous in protecting their children?
Well, courage is contagious. And I will say that, safeguarding and protecting the innocence of children wasn't controversial not too long ago. And so the media is trying to paint this as a partisan issue, but I can promise you this ideology does not discriminate. And this issue of gender ideology is actually extremely unifying because parents from both sides, all walks of life, all different religions, believe that this is harmful to children and we need to eradicate it from our schools and from our society. And I just want to leave your audience with hope that over the last 3 years since I have been helping parents and speaking to parents, I was doing it on my own and now I do it through Do No Harm. It's all free coaching and connection to resources. So many parents are finding success walking their children through this. I'm not going to lie and sugarcoat it. It is a hellish process. I don't wish it upon anybody. This is a radical ideology and it oftentimes takes radical steps to get your child out of it. But parents are finding their parental authority. They are finding success if they're willing to step up to the plate and take those steps. And I'm just grateful that more and more parents are speaking out every day about how this ideology has harmed their families. Because what's really tragic is when their children don't find the ideology until 17 or 18 in college. you have very little control at that point. And
Right.
so, yeah, but I'm grateful that more and more parents are standing up, speaking out, and do what you can do. You don't have to, do what I'm doing or do what Shannon's doing. Talk to your pastor, talk to your neighbors, just have conversations,
Yep.
ask questions, shed a light on the reality of what's happening, and we will end this medical scandal.
Absolutely. Amen to that, January. Well, thank you for the work you're doing again. And I'm so glad to hear that your family and your daughter have moved forward together as a united family and that you are taking steps to empower others on this issue. So, everybody, please share January Littlejohn's remarks from today. All the resources that we talked about will be linked at our blog later today. And check out Jeff's live stream from earlier, Jeanette's a live stream from a couple days ago. If you're in Illinois, Partners for Ethical Care is a great resource for families. Check out donoharmmedicine.org. Get that child and parental rights toolkit and resource and bring it to your churches. Together, we will stop this. So God bless you, January, and your family. Thank you again for coming on. And thanks to everyone who joined us, and have a very, very good weekend.
Thank you, Shannon. God bless you.
Thank you.